Night and Morning, Usury, Mlideen, The Secret of the Gods, and Southwind, From Time and the Gods, by Lord Dunsany. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Måns Bro, Helsingfors, Finland. Time and the Gods by Lord Dunsany. Night and Morning. Once in an arbour of the gods, above the fields of twilight, Night wandering alone came suddenly on morning. Then Night drew from his face his cloak of dark grey mists and said, "See, I am Night." And they two sitting in that arbour of the gods, Night told wondrous stories of all the mysterious happenings in the dark. And Morning sat and wondered, gazing into the face of Night and at his wreath of stars. And Morning told how the rains of Snamartis smoked in the plain, but Night told how Snamartis held riot in the dark, with revelry and drinking and tales told by kings, till all the hosts of Minath crept against it, and the lights went out, and there arose the din of arms, or ever morning came. And Night told how Sindana the beggar had dreamed that he was a king, and Morning told how she had seen Sindana find suddenly an army in the plain, and how he had gone to it thinking he was king, and the army had believed him, and Sindana now ruled over Martis and Targadrides, Dynat, Zan, and Tumeda. And most Night loved to tell how Assarnes, whose ruins are scant memories on the desert's edge, but Morning told of the twin cities of Nardis and Timaut that lorded over the plain, and Night told terribly of what Minandes found when he walked through his own city in the dark. And ever at the elbow of regal Night whispers arose saying, "Tell Morning this." And ever Night told, and ever Morning wondered. And Night spake on, and told what the dead had done when they came in the darkness on the king that had led them into battle once. And Night knew who slew Darnex and how it was done. Moreover, he told why the 7 kings tortured Sidatheris, and what Sidatheris said just at the last, and how the kings went forth and took their lives. And Night told whose blood had stained the marble steps that led to the temple of Ozan, and why the skull within it wears a golden crown, and whose soul is in that wolf that howls in the dark against the city. And Night knew whither the tigers go out of the Irasian desert, and the place where they meet together, and who speaks to them, and what she says, and why. And he told why human teeth had bitten the iron hinge in the great gate that swings in the walls of Mondas, and who came up out of the great marsh alone in the dark time, and demanded audience of the king, and told the king a lie, and how the king, believing it, went down into the vaults of his palace, and found only toads and snakes, who slew the king. And he told of ventures in palace towers in the quiet, and knew the spell whereby a man might send the light of the moon right into the soul of his foe. And Night spoke of the forest and the stirring of shadows, and soft feet pattering, and peering eyes, and of the fear that sits beyond the trees, taking to itself the shape of something crouched at the spring. But far under that arbour of the gods, down on the earth the mountain peak Mondana looked Morning in the eyes, and forsook his allegiance to Night. And one by one the lesser hills about Mondana's knees greeted the Morning, and all the while in the plains the shapes of cities came looming out of the dusk, and Congros stood forth with all her pinnacles, and the winged creatures of poesy carved upon the eastern portal of her gate, and the squat figure of Avarice carved facing it upon the west, and the bat began to tire of going up and down her streets, and already the owl was home. And the dark lions went up out of the plain, back into their caves again. Not as yet shone any dew upon the spider's snare, nor came the sound of an insect stirring or bird of the day, and full allegiance all the valleys owned still to their lord the Night. Yet earth was preparing for another ruler, and kingdom by kingdom she stole away from Night, and there marched through the dreams of men a million heralds that cried with the voice of the cock, "Lo, Morning come behind us." But in that arbour of the gods above the fields of twilight, The star wreath was paling about the head of night, and ever more wonderful on morning's brow appeared the mark of power, and at the moment when the campfires pale and the smoke goes grey to the sky, and camels sniff the dawn, suddenly morning forgot night, and out of that arbour of the gods, and away to the haunts of the dark, night with his swart cloak slunk away, and morning placed her hand upon the mists and drew them upwards and revealed the earth, and drove the shadows before her, and they followed night. And suddenly the mystery quitted haunting shapes, and an old glamour was gone, and far and wide over the fields of earth a new splendour arose. End of Night and Morning. Usury. The men of Zonu hold that Yan is God, who sits as a usurer behind a heap of little lustrous gems and ever clutches at them with both his arms. Scarce larger than a drop of water are the gleaming jewels that lie under the grasping talons of Yan, and every jewel is a life. Men tell in Zonu that the earth was empty when Yan devised his plan, and on it no life stirred. Then Yan lured to him shadows whose home was beyond the rim, who knew little of joys and naught of any sorrow, whose place was beyond the rim before the birth of time. These Yan lured to him and showed them his heap of gems, and in the jewels there was light, and green fields glistened in them, and there were glimpses of blue sky and little streams, and very faintly little gardens showed that flowered in orchard lands, and some showed winds in the heaven, and some showed the arch of the sky with a waste plain drawn across it, with grasses bent in the wind and never aught but the plain. But the gems that changed the most had in their centre the ever-changing sea. Then the shadows gazed into the lives and saw the green fields and the sea on earth and the gardens on earth. And Yan said, I will loan you each a life, and you may do your work with it upon the scheme of things, and have each a shadow for his servant in green fields and in gardens. Only for these things you shall polish these lives with experience, and cut their edges with your griefs, and in the end shall return them again to me. And thereto the shadows consented, that they might have gleaming lives and have shadows for their servants, and this thing became the law. But the shadows, each with his life, departed and came to Zonu and to other lands, and there with experience they polished the lives of Yan, and cut them with human griefs until they gleamed anew. And ever they found new scenes to gleam within these lives, and cities and sails and men shone in them where there had been before only green fields and sea. And ever Yan the usurer cried out to remind them of their bargain, when men added to their lives scenes that were pleasant to Yan. Then was Yan silent, but when they added scenes that pleased not the eyes of Yan, then did he take a toll of sorrow from them, because it was the law. But men forgot the usurer, and there arose some claiming to be wise in the law, who said that after their labour, which they wrought upon their lives, was done, those lives should be theirs to possess. So men took comfort from their toil and labour and the grinding and cutting of their griefs. But as their lives began to shine with experience of many things, the thumb and forefinger of Yan would suddenly close upon the life, and the man became a shadow. But away beyond the rim the shadows say, We have greatly laboured for Yan, and have gathered griefs in the world, and caused his lives to shine, and Yan does naught for us. Far better had we stayed where no cares are, floating beyond the rim. And there the shadows fear, lest ever again they be lured by his specious promises to suffer usury at the hands of Yan, who is overskilled in law. Only Yan sits and smiles, watching his hoard increase in preciousness, and hath no pity for the poor shadows, whom he has lured from their quiet to toil in the form of men. And ever Yan lures more shadows and sends them to brighten his lives, sending the old lives out again to make them brighter still. And sometimes he gives to a shadow a life that was once a king's, and sendeth him with it down to the earth to play the part of a beggar, or sometimes he sendeth a beggar's life to play the part of a king. What careth Yan? The men of Zonu have been promised by those that claim to be wise in the law, that their lives, which they have toiled at, shall be theirs to possess for ever. Yet the men of Zonu fear that Yan is greater and overskilled in the law. Moreover, it hath been said that time will bring the hour when the wealth of Yan shall be such as his dreams have lusted for. Then shall Jan leave the earth at rest and trouble the shadows no more, but sit and gloat with his unseemly face over his hoard of lives, for his soul is a usurer's soul. But others say, and they swear that this is true, that there are gods of old who be far greater than Jan, who made a law wherein Jan is overskilled, and who will one day drive a bargain with him that shall be too hard for Jan. Then Jan shall wander away, a mean forgotten god, and perchance in some forsaken land shall haggle with the rain for a drop of water to drink, for his soul is a usurer's soul. And the lives, who knoweth the gods of old, or what their will shall be? End of usury. Mlideen. Upon an evening of the forgotten years, the gods were seated upon Movra Navut, above Mlideen, holding the avalanche in leash. All in the middle city stood the temples of their city's priests, and hither came all the people of Mlideen to bring them gifts, and there it was the wont of the city's priests to carve them gods for Mlideen. For in a room apart, in the temple of Eld, in the midst of the temples that stood in the middle city of Mlideen, there lay a book called the Book of Beautiful Devices, written in language that no man may read or writ, long ago, telling how a man may make for himself gods that shall neither rage nor seek revenge against the little people. And ever the priests came forth from reading in the Book of Beautiful Devices, and ever they sought to make benignant gods, and all the gods that they made were different from each other, only their eyes turned all upon Mlideen. But upon Movra Navut, for all of the forgotten years, the gods had waited and forborne until the people of Mlideen should have carven 100 gods. Never came lightnings from Movrat Navut crashing upon Mlideen, nor blight or harvests, nor pestilence in the city. Only upon Movra Navut the gods sat and smiled. The people of Mlideen had said, Yoma is good, and the gods sat and smiled. And after the forgetting of Yoma and the passing of years, the people had said, Zungari is God, and the gods sat and smiled. Then on the altar of Zungari a priest had set a figure squat, carven in purple agate, saying, Yazun is God. Still the gods sat and smiled. About the feet of Yonu, Bazun, Nidish, and Sundrao had gone the worship of the people of Mlideen, and still the gods sat holding the avalanche in leash above the city. There sat a great calm towards sunset over the heights, and Movra Navut stood up still with gleaming snow, and into the hot city cool breezes blew from his benignant slopes as Tarzizalo, high prophet of Mlideen, carved out of a great sapphire the city's 100th god. And then upon Movrat Navut the gods turned away, saying, 100 infamies have now been wrought. And they looked no longer upon Mlideen, and held the avalanche no more in leash, and he leapt forward howling. Over the middle city of Mlideen now lies a mass of rocks, and on the rocks a new city is builded, wherein people dwell who know not old Mlideen, and the gods are seated on Movrat Navut still. And in the new city men worship carven gods, and the number of the gods that they have carven is 99, and I, the prophet, have found a curious stone, and go to carve it into the likeness of a god for all Mlideen to worship. End of Mlideen. The secret of the gods. Syni Moi, the small snake, saw the cool river gleaming before him afar off, and set out over the burning sand to reach it. Uldon, the prophet, came out of the desert and followed up the banks of the river towards his old home. 30 years since Uldon had left the city where he was born, to live his life in a silent place where he might search for the secret of the gods. The name of his home was the City of the River, and in that city many prophets taught concerning many gods, and men made many secrets for themselves. But all the while none knew the secret of the gods, nor might any seek to find it, for if any sought, men said of him, This man sins, for he giveth no worship to the gods that speak to our prophets by starlight when none heareth. And Uldun perceived that the mind of a man is as a garden, and that his thoughts are as the flowers, and the prophets of a man's city are as many gardeners who weed and trim, and who have made in the garden paths both smooth and straight, and only along these paths is a man's soul permitted to go, lest the gardeners say, This soul transgresseth. And from the paths the gardeners weed out every flower that grows, and in the garden they cut off all flowers that grow tall, saying, "It is customary," and "It is written," and "This hath ever been," or "That has not been before." Therefore Uldoon saw that not in the city might he discover the secret of the gods. And Uldoon said to the people, "When the worlds began, the secret of the gods lay written clear over the whole earth, but the feet of many prophets have trampled it out. Your prophets are all true men, but I go into the desert to find the truth which is truer than your prophets." Therefore Uldoon went into the desert, and in storm and still he sought for many years. When the thunder roared over the mountains that limited the desert, he sought the secret in the thunder, but the gods spake not by the thunder. When the voices of the beasts disturbed the stillness under the stars, he sought the secret there, but the gods spake not by the beasts. Uldoon grew old, and all the voices of the desert had spoken to Uldoon, but not the gods, when one night he heard them whispering beyond the hills. And the gods whispered one to another, and turning their faces earthward they all wept. And Uldoon thought he saw not the gods, yet saw their shadows turn, as they went back to a great hollow in the hills, and there, all standing in the valley's mouth, they said, "O morning Zai, O oldest of the gods, the faith of thee is gone, and yesterday for the last time thy name was spoken upon earth." And turning eastward they all wept again. And the gods tore white clouds out of the sky and draped them about the body of morning Zai, and bore him forth from his valley beyond the hills, and muffled the mountain peaks with snow, and beat upon their summits with drumsticks carved of ebony, playing the dirge of the gods. And the echoes rolled about the passes and the wind howled, because the faith of the olden days was gone, and with it had sped the soul of morning Zai. So through the mountain passes the gods came at night bearing their dead father, and Uldoon followed. And the gods came to a great sepulchre of onyx that stood upon 4 fluted pillars of white marble, each carved out of 4 mountains, and therein the gods laid morning Zai, because their old faith was fallen. And there at the tomb of their father the gods spake, and Uldoon heard the secret of the gods, and it became to him a simple thing such as a man might well guess, yet hath not. Then the soul of the desert rose and cast over the tomb its wreath of forgetfulness, devised of drifting sand, and the gods strode home across the mountains to their hollow land. But Uldoon left the desert and travelled many days, and so came to the river where it passes beyond the city to seek the sea, and following its bank came near to his old home. And the people of the city of the river, seeing him far off, cried out, "Hast thou found the secret of the gods?" And he answered, "I have found it, and the secret of the gods is this: Sunimoe, the small snake, seeing the figure and the shadow of a man between him and the cool river, raised his head and struck once, and the gods are pleased with Sunimoe, and have called him the protector of the secret of the gods." End of the secret of the gods. The South Wind. 2 players sat down to play a game together to while eternity away, and they chose the gods as pieces wherewith to play their game, and for their board of playing they chose the sky from rim to rim, whereon lay a little dust, and every speck of dust was a world upon the board of playing. And the players were robed and their faces veiled, and the robes and veils were alike, and their names were Faith and Chance. And as they played their game and moved the gods hither and thither about the board, the dust arose and shone in the light from the players' eyes that gleamed behind the veils. Then said the gods, "See how we stir the dust. It chanced, or was ordained, who knoweth which, that Ord, a prophet, one night saw the gods as they strode knee-deep among the stars. But as he gave them worship he saw the hand of a player, enormous over their heads, stretched out to make his move. Then Ord the prophet knew. Had he been silent it might have still been well with Ord. But Ord went about the world crying out to all men, 'There is a power over the gods.' This the gods heard. Then said they, 'Ord hath seen. Terrible is the vengeance of the gods.' And fierce were their eyes when they looked on the head of Ord and snatched out of his mind all knowledge of themselves. and that man's soul went wandering afield to find for itself gods, forever finding them not. Then out of Ord's dream of life the gods plucked the moon and the stars, and in the night time he saw only black sky and saw the lights no more. Next the gods took from him, for their vengeance resteth not, the birds and butterflies, flowers and leaves and insects and all small things. And the prophet looked on the world that was strangely altered, yet knew not of the anger of the gods. Then the gods sent away his familiar hills to be seen no more by him, and all the pleasant woodlands on their summits, and the further fields, and in a narrower world Ord walked round and round, now seeing little, and his soul still wandered, searching for some gods and finding none. Lastly the gods took away the fields and stream, and left to the prophet only his house and the larger things that were in it. Day by day they crept about him, drawing films of mist between him and the familiar things, till at last he beheld naught at all, and was quite blind and unaware of the anger of the gods. Then Ord's world became only a world of sound, and only by hearing he kept his hold upon things. All the profit that he had out of his days was here some song from the hills, or there the voice of the birds, and sound of the stream, or the drip of the falling rain. But the anger of the gods ceases not with the closing of flowers, nor is it assuaged by all the winter's snows, nor doth it rest in the full glare of summer, and they snatched away from Ord one night his world of sound, and he awoke deaf. But as a man may smite away the hive of the bee, and the bee with all his fellows builds again, knowing not what hath smitten his hive or that it shall smite again, so Ord built for himself a world out of old memories and set it in the past. There he builded himself cities out of former joys, and therein built palaces of mighty things achieved, and with his memory as a key he opened golden locks and had still a world to live in, though the gods had taken from him the world of sound and all the world of sight. But the gods tired not from pursuing, and they seized his world of former things and took his memory away, and covered up the paths that led into the past, and left him blind and deaf and forgetful among men, and caused all men to know that this was he who once had said the gods were little things. And lastly the gods took his soul, and out of it they fashioned the south wind, to roam the seas forever and not have rest. And well the south wind knows that he hath once understood somewhere and long ago, and so he moans to the islands and cries along southern shores, "I have known, and I have known." But all things sleep when the south winds speak to them, and none heed his cry that he hath known, but are rather content to sleep. But still the south wind, knowing that there is something that he hath forgot, goes on crying, "I have known," seeking to urge men to arise and to discover it. But none heed the sorrows of the south wind, even when he driveth his tears out of the south. So that though the south wind cries on and never findeth rest, none heed that there is aught that may be known, and the secret of the gods is safe. But the business of the south wind is with the north, and it is said that the time will one day come when he shall overcome the bergs and sink the poles of ice, and come where the secret of the gods is graven upon the pole, and the game of fate and chance shall suddenly cease, and he that loses shall cease to be or ever to have been, and from the board of playing fate or chance, who knoweth which shall win, shall sweep the gods away. End of the South Wind by Lord Dunsany. Recording by Måns Bro, Helsingfors, Finland.
Section 10 Time and the Gods by Lord Dunsany. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. In the Land of Time. Thus Carnith, king of Alatta, spake to his eldest son, I bequeath to thee my city of Zun, with its golden eaves whereunder hum the bees, and I bequeath to thee also the land of Alatta, and all such other lands as thou art worthy to possess. For my 3 strong armies which I leave thee may well take Zindara and overrun Istan, and drive back Onin from his frontier. and leaguer the walls of Yann, and beyond that spread conquest over the lesser lands of Hebith, Ebnon, and Carida. Only lead not thine armies against Xenar, nor ever cross the Eidis. Thereat in the city of Zun, in the land of Alatta, under his golden eaves, died King Karnith, and his soul went whither had gone the souls of his sires the elder kings, and the souls of their slaves. Then Karnith Zo, the new king, took the iron crown of Alatta, and afterwards went down to the plains that encircle Zun, and found his 3 strong armies clamouring to be led against Xenar over the river Eidis. But the new king came back from his armies, and all one night in the great palace, alone with his iron crown, pondered long upon war. And a little before dawn he saw dimly through his palace window, facing east over the city of Zun and across the fields of Alatta to far off where a valley opened on Istan. There as he pondered he saw the smoke arising tall and straight over small houses in the plain and the fields where the sheep fed. Later the sun rose shining over Alatta as it shone over Istan, and there arose a stir about the houses both in Alatta and Istan, and cocks crowed in the city, and men went out into the fields among the bleating sheep. And the king wondered if men did otherwise in Istan. And men and women met as they went out to work, and the sound of laughter arose from streets and fields. The king's eyes gazed into the distance towards Istan, and still the smoke went upward tall and straight from the small houses, and the sun rose higher that shone upon Alatta and Istan, causing the flowers to open wide in each, and the birds to sing, and the voices of men and women to arise. And in the marketplace of Zun caravans were astir that set out to carry merchandise to Istan, and afterwards passed camels coming to Alatta with many tinkling bells. All this the king saw as he pondered much who had not pondered before. Westward the Agnid mountains frowned in the distance, guarding the river Eidis. Behind them the fierce people of Xenar lived in a bleak land. Later the king, going abroad through his new kingdom, came on the temple of the gods of old. There he found the roof shattered and the marble columns broken, and tall weeds met together in the inner shrine. And the gods of old, bereft of worship or sacrifice, neglected and forgotten. And the king asked of his counsellors who it was that had overturned this temple of the gods, or caused the gods themselves to be thus forsaken. And they answered him, "Time has done this." Next the king came upon a man bent and crippled, whose face was furrowed and worn. And the king, having seen no sight within the court of his father, said to the man, "Who hath done this thing to you?" And the old man answered, "Time hath ruthlessly done it." But the king and his counsellors went on, and next they came upon a body of men carrying among them a hearse. And the king asked his counsellors closely concerning death, for these things had not before been expounded to the king. And the oldest of the counsellors answered, "Death, O king, is a gift sent by the gods by the hand of their servant Time, and some receive it gladly, and some are forced reluctantly to take it, and before others it is suddenly flung in the middle of the day. And with this gift that Time hath brought him from the gods, a man must go forth into the dark, possess no other thing for so long as the gods are willing." But the king went back to his palace, and gathered the greatest of his prophets and his counsellors, and asked them more particularly concerning Time. And they told the king how that Time was a great figure standing like a tall shadow in the dusk, or striding unseen across the world, and how that he was the slave of the gods and did their bidding, but ever chose new masters, and how all the former masters of Time were dead, and their shrines forgotten. And one said, "I have seen him once, when I went down to play again in the garden of my childhood, because of certain memories. And it was towards evening, and the light was pale, and I saw Time standing over the little gate, pale like the light. And he stood between me and that garden, and had stolen my memories, because he was mightier than I." And another said, "I too have seen the enemy of my house, For I saw him when he strode over the fields that I knew well, and led a stranger by the hand to place him in my home, to sit where my forefathers sat. And I saw him afterwards walk thrice round the house, and stoop and gather up the glamour from the lawns, and brush aside the tall poppies in the garden, and spread weeds in his pathway where he strode through the remembered nooks. And another said, He went one day into the desert and brought up life out of the waste places, and made it cry bitterly, and covered it with the desert again. And another said, I too saw him once seated in the garden of a child tearing the flowers, and afterwards he went away through many woodlands, and stooped down as he went, and picked the leaves one by one from the trees. And another said, I saw him once by moonlight, standing tall and black amidst the ruins of a shrine, in the old kingdom of Amarna, doing a deed by night, and he wore a look on his face such as murderers wear as he busied himself to cover over something with weeds and dust. Thereafter in Amarna the people of that old kingdom missed their god, in whose shrine I saw Time crouching in the night, and they have not since beheld him. And all the while from the distance at the city's edge rose a hum from the 3 armies of the king, clamouring to be led against Zeenar. Thereat the king went down to his 3 armies, and speaking to their chiefs said, I will not go down clad with murder to be king over other lands. I have seen the same morning a rising on Istan that also gladdened Alatta, and have heard peace lowing among the flowers. I will not desolate homes to rule over an orphaned land and a land widowed, but I will lead you against the pledged enemy of Alatta, who shall crumble the towers of Zun, and hath gone far to overthrow our gods. He is the foe of Zindara and Istan, and many citadelled Yan. Hebith and Ebnon may not overcome him, nor Karida be safe against him among her bleakest mountains. He is a foe mightier than Zeenar, with frontiers stronger than Edis. He leers at all the peoples of the earth, and mocks their gods, and covets their builded cities. Therefore we will go forth and conquer Time, and save the gods of Alatta from his clutch, and coming back victorious shall find that death is gone and age and illness departed, and here we shall live forever by the golden eaves of Zun, while the bees hum among unrusted gables and never crumbling towers. There shall be neither fading, nor forgetting, nor ever dying, nor sorrow, when we shall have freed the people and pleasant fields of the earth from inexorable Time. And the armies swore that they would follow the king to save the world and the gods. So the next day the king set forth with his 3 armies, and crossed many rivers, and marched through many lands. And wherever they went they asked for news of Time. And the first day they met a woman with her face furrowed and lined, who told them that she had been beautiful, and that Time had smitten her in the face with his 5 claws. Many an old man they met as they marched in search of Time. All had seen him, but none could tell them more, except that some said he went that way, and pointed to a ruined tower, or to an old and broken tree. And day after day, and month by month, the king pushed on with his armies, hoping to come at last on Time. Sometimes they encamped at night near palaces of beautiful design, or beside gardens of flowers, hoping to find their enemy when he came to desecrate in the dark. Sometimes they came on cobwebs, sometimes on rusted chains and houses with broken roofs or crumbling walls. Then the armies would push on apace, thinking that they were closer upon the track of Time. As the weeks passed by and weeks grew to months, and always they heard reports and rumors of Time but never found him, the armies grew weary of the great march, but the king pushed on and would let none turn back, saying always that the enemy was near at hand. Month in, month out, the king led on his now unwilling armies, till at last they had marched for close upon a year, and came to the village of Astarma, very far to the north. There many of the king's weary soldiers deserted from his armies, and settled down in Astarma, and married Astarmian girls. By these soldiers we have the march of the armies clearly chronicled to the time when they came to Astarma, having been nigh a year upon the march. And the army left that village, and the children cheered them as they went up the street. and 5 miles distant they passed over a ridge of hills and out of sight. Beyond this less is known, but the rest of this chronicle is gathered from the tales that the veterans of the king's armies used to tell in the evenings about the fires in Zun, and remembered afterwards by the men of Zinar. It is mostly credited in these days that such of the king's armies as went on past Astarma came at last, it is not known after how long a time, over a crest of a slope, where the whole earth slanted green to the north. Below it lay green fields, and beyond them moaned the sea, with never shore nor island so far as the eye could reach. Among the green fields lay a village, and on this village the eyes of the king and his armies were turned as they came down the slope. It lay beneath them, grave with seared antiquity, with old world gables stained and bent by the lapse of frequent years, with all its chimneys awry. Its roofs were tiled with antique stones, covered over deep with moss. Each little window looked with a myriad strange cut panes on the gardens shaped with quaint devices and overrun with weeds. On rusted hinges the doors swung to and fro, and were fashioned of planks of immemorial oak with black knots gaping from their sockets. Against it all there beat the thistledown. About it clambered the ivy or swayed the weeds. Tall and straight out of the twisted chimneys arose blue columns of smoke, and blades of grass peeped upward between the huge cobbles of the unmolested street. Between the gardens and the cobbled street stood hedges higher than a horseman might look, of stalwart thorn, and upward through it clambered the convolvulus to peer into the garden from the top. Before each house there was cut a gap in the hedge, and in it swung a wicket gate of timber soft with the rain and years, and green like the moss. Over all of it there brooded age and the full hush of things bygone and forgotten. Upon this derelict that the years had cast up out of antiquity the king and his armies gazed long. Then on the hill slope the king made his armies halt, and went down alone with one of his chiefs into the village. Presently there was a stir in one of the houses, and a bat flew out of the door into the daylight, and 3 mice came running out of the doorway down the step. An old stone cracked in two and held together by moss, and there followed an old man bending on a stick with a white beard coming to the ground, wearing clothes that were glossed with use. And presently there came others out of the other houses, all of them as old, and all hobbling on sticks. These were the oldest people that the king had ever beheld, and he asked them the name of the village and who they were. And one of them answered, "This is the city of the aged in the territory of Time." And the king said, "Is Time then here?" And one of the old men pointed to a great castle standing on a steep hill and said, "Therein dwells Time, and we are his people." And they all looked curiously at King Carnethzo, and the eldest of the villagers spoke again and said, "Whence do you come, you that are so young?" And Carnethzo told him how he had come to conquer Time, to save the world and the gods, and asked them whence they came. And the villagers said, "We are older than always, and know not whence we came, but we are the people of Time, and here from the edge of everything he sends out his hours to assail the world, and you may never conquer Time." But the king went back to his armies and pointed towards the castle on the hill, and told them that at last they had found the enemy of the earth. And they that were older than always went back slowly into their houses with the creaking of olden doors, and there they went across the fields and past the village. From one of his towers Time eyed them all the while, and in battle order they closed in on the steep hill as Time sat still in his great tower and watched. But as the feet of the foremost touched the edge of the hill, Time hurled 5 years against them, and the years passed over their heads, and the army still came on, an army of older men. But the slope seemed steeper to the king and to every man in his army, and they breathed more heavily, And Time summoned up more years, and one by one he hurled them at Carnith Zo and at all his men, and the knees of the army stiffened, and their beards grew and turned grey, and the hours and days and the months went singing over their heads, and their hair turned whiter and whiter, and the conquering hours bore down, and the years rushed on and swept the youth of that army clear away, till they came face to face under the walls of the castle of Time with a mass of howling years, and found the top of the slope too steep for aged men. Slowly and painfully, harassed with agues and chills, the king rallied his aged army that tottered down the slope. Slowly the king led his warriors over whose heads had shrieked the triumphant years. Year in, year out, they straggled southwards, always towards Zun. They came with rust upon their spears and long beards flowing again into Astarma, and none knew them there. They passed again by towns and villages where once they had inquired curiously concerning Time, and none knew them there either. They came again to the palaces and gardens where they had waited for Time in the night, and found that Time had been there, and all the while they set a hope before them that they should come on Zun again and see its golden eaves. And no one knew that unperceived behind them there lurked and followed the gaunt figure of Time, cutting off stragglers one by one and overwhelming them with his hours. Only men were missed from the army every day, and fewer grew the veterans of Carnith Zo. But at last, after many a month, one night as they marched in the dusk before the morning, dawn suddenly ascending shone on the eaves of Zun, and a great cry ran through the army, "Alata! Alata!" But drawing nearer they found that the gates were rusted, and weeds grew tall along the outer walls. Many a roof had fallen, gables were blackened and bent, and the golden eaves shone not as heretofore, and the soldiers entering the city expecting to find their sisters and sweethearts of a few years ago saw only old women wrinkled with great age, and knew not who they were. Suddenly someone said, "He has been here too," and then they knew that while they searched for Time, Time had gone forth against their city and leaguered it with the years, and had taken it while they were far away, and enslaved their women and children with the yoke of age. So all that remained of the 3 armies of Carnith Zo settled in the conquered city, and presently the men of Zeenar crossed over the river Adis, and easily conquering an army of aged men, took all Alata for themselves, and their kings reigned thereafter in the city of Zun. And sometimes the men of Zeenar listened to the strange tales that the old Alatans told of the years when they made battle against Time. Such of these tales as the men of Zeenar remembered they afterwards set forth, and this is all that may be told of those adventurous armies that went to war with Time to save the world and the gods, and were overwhelmed by the hours and the years. End of section 10.
Vox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Relenting of Sarnidak, The Gest of the Gods, and The Dreams of the Prophet, from Time and the Gods by Lord Dunsany. The Relenting of Sarnidak. The lame boy Sarnidak tended sheep on a hill to the southward of the city. Sarnidak was a dwarf, and greatly derided in the city, for the women said, "It is very funny that Sarnidak is a dwarf," and they would point their fingers at him, saying, "This is Sarnidak, he is a dwarf, also he is very lame." Once the doors of all the temples in the world swung open to the morning, and Sarnidak, with his sheep upon the hill, saw strange figures going down the white road, always southwards. All the morning he saw the dust rising above the strange figures, and always they went southward. right as far as the rim of the Nidun hills, where the white road could be seen no more. And the figures stooped and seemed to be larger than men, but all men seemed very large to Sarnidac, and he could not see clearly through the dust. And Sarnidac shouted to them as he hailed all people that passed down the long white road, and none of the figures looked to the left or to the right, and none of them turned to answer Sarnidac. But then few people ever answered him, because he was lame and a small dwarf. Still the figures went striding swiftly, stooping forward through the dust, till at last Sarnidac came running down his hill to watch them closer. As he came to the white road, the last of the figures passed him, and Sarnidac ran limping behind him down the road. For Sarnidac was weary of the city wherein all derided him, and when he saw these figures all hurrying away, he thought that they went perhaps to some other city beyond the hills, over which the sun shone brighter, or where there was more food, for he was poor, even perhaps where people had not the custom of laughing at Sarnidac. So this procession of figures that stooped and seemed larger than men went southward down the road, and a lame dwarf hobbled behind them. Khamazan, now called the city of the last of temples, lies southward of the Nidun hills. This is the story of Pompeides, now chief prophet of the only temple in the world, and greatest of all the prophets that have been. On the slopes of Nidun I was seated once above Khamazan. There I saw figures in the morning striding through much dust along the road that leads across the world. Striding up the hill they came towards me, not with the gait of men, and soon the first one came to the crest of the hill where the road dips to find the plains again, where lies Khamazan. And now I swear by all the gods that are gone that this thing happened as I shall say it, and was surely so. When those that came striding up the hill came to its summit, they took not the road that goes down into the plains, nor trod the dust any longer, but went straight on and upwards, striding as they strode before, as though the hill had not ended nor the road dipped. And they strode as though they trod no yielding substance, yet they stepped upwards through the air. This the gods did, for they were not born men who strode that day so strangely away from earth. But I, when I saw this thing, when already three had passed me leaving earth, cried out before the fourth, "Gods of my childhood, guardians of little homes, whither are ye going, leaving the round earth to swim alone and forgotten in so great a waste of sky?" And one answered, "Heresy apace shoots her fierce glare over the world, and men's faith grows dim and the gods go. Men shall make iron gods and gods of steel when the wind and the ivy meet within the shrines of the temples of the gods of old." And I left that place as a man leaves fire by night, and going plainwards down the white road that the gods spurned, cried out to all that I passed to follow me, and so crying came to the city's gates. And there I shouted to all near the gates, "From yonder hilltop the gods are leaving earth." Then I gathered many, and we all hastened to the hill to pray the gods to tarry, and there we cried out to the last of the departing gods, "Gods of old prophecy and of men's hopes, leave not the earth, and all our worship shall hum about your ears as never it hath before, and oft the sacrifice shall squeal upon your altars." And I said, "Gods of still evenings and quiet nights, go not from earth and leave not your carven shrines, and all men shall worship you still. For between us and yonder still blue spaces oft roam the thunder and the storms. There in his hiding lurks the dark eclipse, and there are stored all snows and hails and lightnings that shall vex the earth for 1,000,000 years. Gods of our hope, how shall men's prayers crying from empty shrines pass through such terrible spaces? How shall they ever fare above the thunder and many storms to whatever place the gods may go in that blue waste beyond?" But the gods bent straight forward and trampled through the sky and looked not to the right nor left nor downwards, nor ever heeded my prayer. And one cried out, hoping yet to stay the gods, though nearly all were gone, saying, O gods, rob not the earth of the dim hush that hangs round all your temples. Bereave not all the world of old romance. Take not the glamour from the moonlight, nor tear the wonder out of the white mists in every land. For, O ye gods of the childhood of the world, when you have left the earth, you shall have taken the mystery from the sea, and all its glory from antiquity, and you shall have wrenched out hope from the dim future. There shall be no strange cries at night time, half understood, nor songs in the twilight. And the whole of wonder shall have died with last year's flowers in the little gardens or hill slopes leaning south. For with the gods must go the enchantment of the plains, and all the magic of dark woods, and something shall be lacking from the quiet of early dawn. For it would scarce befit the gods to leave the earth and not take with them that which they had given it. Out beyond the still blue spaces ye will need the holiness of sunset for yourselves, and little sacred memories, and the thrill that is in stories told by firesides long ago. One strain of music, one song, one line of poetry, and one kiss, and a memory of one pool with rushes, and each one the best, shall the gods take to whom the best belongs, when the gods go. Sing a lamentation, people of Khamazan! Sing a lamentation for all the children of earth at the feet of the departing gods. Sing a lamentation for the children of earth, who now must carry their prayers to empty shrines, and around empty shrines must rest at last. Then, when our prayers were ended and our tears shed, we beheld the last and smallest of the gods halted upon the hilltop. Twice he called to them with a cry somewhat like the cry wherewith our shepherds hail their brethren, and long gazed after them, and then deigned to look no longer, and to tarry upon earth and turn his eyes on men. Then a great shout went up when we saw that our hopes were saved, and that there was still on earth a haven for our prayers. Smaller than men now seemed the figures that had loomed so big, as one behind the other, far over our heads, they still strode upwards. But the small god that had pitied the world came with us down the hill, still deigning to tread the road, though strangely, not as men tread, and into Khamazan. There we housed him in the palace of the king, for that was before the building of the temple of gold, and the king made sacrifice before him with his own hands, and he that had pitied the world did eat the flesh of the sacrifice. And the book of the knowledge of the gods in Khamazan tells how the small god that pitied the world told his prophets that his name was Sarnidak, and that he herded sheep, and that therefore he is called the shepherd god, and sheep are sacrificed upon his altars thrice a day, and the north, east, west, and the south are the four hurdles of Sarnidak, and the white clouds are his sheep. And the book of the knowledge of the gods tells further how the day on which Pompeides found the gods shall be kept for ever as a fast until the evening, and called the fast of the departing. But in the evening shall a feast be held, which is named the feast of the relenting, for on that evening Sarnidak pitied the whole world and tarried. And the people of Khamazan all prayed to Sarnidak, and dreamt their dreams, and hoped their hopes, because their temple was not empty. Whether the gods that are departed be greater than Sarnidak, none know in Khamazan, but some believe that in their azure windows they have set lights, that lost prayers swarming upwards may come to them like moths, and at last find haven and light far up above the evening and the stillness, where sit the gods. But Sarnidak wondered at the strange figures, at the people of Khamazan, and at the palace of the king, and the customs of the prophets, but wondered not more greatly at aught in Khamazan than he had wondered at the city which he had left. For Sarnidak, who had not known why men were unkind to him, thought that he had found at last the land for which the gods had let him hope, where men should have the custom of being kind to Sarnidak. End of The Relenting of Sarnidac. The Gest of the Gods. Once the older gods had need of laughter. Therefore they made the soul of a king, and set in it ambitions greater than kings should have, and lust for territories beyond the lust of other kings, and in this soul they set strength beyond the strength of others, and fierce desire for power, and a strong pride. Then the gods pointed earthward and sent that soul into the fields of men to live in the body of a slave, and the slave grew, and the pride and lust for power began to arise in his heart, and he wore shackles on his arms. Then in the fields of twilight the gods prepared to laugh. But the slave went down to the shore of the great sea, and cast his body away and the shackles that were upon it, and strode back to the fields of twilight, and stood up before the gods, and looked them in their faces. This thing the gods, when they had prepared to laugh, had not foreseen. Lust for power burnt strong in that king's soul, and there was all the strength and pride in it that the gods had placed therein. And he was too strong for the older gods. He whose body had borne the lashes of men could brook no longer the dominion of the gods, and standing before them he bade the gods to go. Up to their lips leapt all the anger of the older gods, being for the first time commanded. But the king's soul faced them still, and their anger died away, and they averted their eyes. Then their thrones became empty, and the fields of twilight bare, as the gods slunk far away. But the soul chose new companions. End of Gest of the Gods. The Dreams of the Prophet. 1. When the gods drave me forth to toil, and assailed me with thirst, and beat me down with hunger, then I prayed to the gods. When the gods smote the cities wherein I dwelt, and when their anger scorched me, and their eyes burnt, then did I praise the gods and offer sacrifice. But when I came again to my green land, and found that all was gone, and the old mysterious haunts wherein I prayed as a child were gone, and when the gods tore up the dust, and even the spider's web from the last remembered nook, then did I curse the gods, speaking it to their faces, saying: Gods of my prayers, gods of my sacrifice, because ye have forgotten the sacred places of my childhood, and they have therefore ceased to be, yet may I not forget. Because ye have done this thing, ye shall see cold altars, and shall lack both my fear and praise. I shall not wince at your lightnings, nor be awed when ye go by. Then looking seawards, I stood and cursed the gods, and at this moment there came to me one in the garb of a poet, who said, Curse not the gods. And I said to him, Wherefore should I not curse those that have stolen my sacred places in the night, and trodden down the gardens of my childhood? And he said, Come, and I will show thee. And I followed him to where two camels stood with their faces towards the desert. And we set out, and I travelled with him for a great space, he speaking never a word. And so we came at last to a waste valley hid in the desert's midst. And herein, like fallen moons, I saw vast ribs that stood up white out of the sand, higher than the hills of the desert. And here and there lay the enormous shapes of skulls, like the white marble domes of palaces built for tyrannous kings a long while since, by armies of driven slaves. Also there lay in the desert other bones, the bones of vast legs and arms, against which the desert, like a besieging sea, ever advanced, and already had half drowned. And as I gazed in wonder at these colossal things, the poet said to me, The gods are dead. And I gazed long in silence, and I said, These fingers that are now so dead and so very white and still tore once the flowers in the gardens of my youth. But my companion said to me, I have brought thee here to ask of thee thy forgiveness of the gods, for I, being a poet, knew the gods, and would fain drive off the curses that hover above their bones, and bring them men's forgiveness as an offering at the last, that the weeds and the ivy may cover their bones from the sun. And I said, They made Remorse, with his fur grey like a rainy evening in the autumn, with many rending claws, and Pain with his hot hands and lingering feet, and Fear like a rat with two cold teeth carved each out of the ice of either pole, and Anger with the swift flight of the dragonfly in summer, having burning eyes. I will not forgive these gods. But the poet said, "Canst thou be angry with these beautiful white bones?" And I looked long at those curved and beautiful bones that were no longer able to hurt the smallest creature in all the worlds that they had made, and I thought long of the evil that they had done, and also of the good. But when I thought of their great hands coming red and wet from battles to make a primrose for a child to pick, then I forgave the gods. And a gentle rain came falling out of heaven and stilled the restless sand, and a soft green moss grew suddenly and covered the bones till they looked like strange green hills, and I heard a cry and awoke and found that I had dreamt. And looking out of my house into the street I found that a flash of lightning had killed a child. Then I knew that the gods still lived. 2. I lay asleep in the poppy fields of the gods in the valley of Aldernon, where the gods come by night to meet together in council when the moon is low, and I dreamt that this was the secret. Fate and Chance had played their game and ended, and all was over, all the hopes and tears, regrets, desires and sorrows, things that men wept for, and unremembered things, and kingdoms and little gardens, and the sea, and the worlds, and the moons, and the suns, and what remained was nothing, having neither colour nor sound. Then said Fate to Chance, "Let us play our old game again." And they played it again together, using the gods as pieces, as they had played it oft before, so that those things which have been shall all be again, and under the same bank in the same land a sudden glare of singlight on the same spring day shall bring the same daffodil to bloom once more, and the same child shall pick it, and not regretted shall be the billion years that fell between, and the same old faces shall be seen again, yet not bereaved of their familiar haunts, and you and I shall in a garden meet again upon an afternoon in summer, when the sun stands midway between his zenith and the sea, where we have met oft before. For Fate and Chance play but one game together, with every move the same, and they play it oft to while eternity away. End of Dreams of the Prophet.
Journey of the King, Parts 1 and 2, from Time and the Gods by Lord Dunsany. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Time and the Gods by Lord Dunsany. The Journey of the King, Parts 1 and 2. One day the King turned to the women that danced, and said to them, "Dance no more." And those that bore the wine in jewelled cups he sent away. The palace of King Ebalon was emptied of sound, of song, and there rose the voices of heralds crying in the streets to find the prophets of the land. Then went the dancers, the cupbearer, and the singers down into the hard streets among the houses. Pattering leaves, silvern fountain, and summer lightning, the dancers whose feet the gods had not devised for stony ways, which had only danced for princes. And with them went the singer, Soul of the South, and the sweet singer, Dream of the Sea, whose voices the gods had attuned to the ears of kings. And old Istan, the cupbearer, left his life's work in the palace to tread the common ways, he that had stood at the elbows of 3 kings of Zarkandhu, and had watched his ancient vintage feeding their valor and mirth as the waters of Tondaris feed the green plains to the south. Ever he had stood grave among their jests, but his heart warmed itself solely by the fire of the mirth of kings. He too, with the singers and dancers, went out into the dark. and throughout the land the heralds sought out the prophets thereof. Then one evening as King Ebalon sat alone within his palace, there were brought before him all who had repute for wisdom and who wrote the histories of the times to be. Then the king spake, saying, The king goeth upon a journey with many horses, yet riding upon none, when the pomp of travelling shall be heard in the streets, and the sound of the lute and the drum, and the name of the king. And I would know what princes and what people shall greet me on the other shore in the land to which I travel. Then fell a hush upon the prophets, for they murmured, All knowledge is with the king. Then said the king, Thou first, Saman, high prophet of the temple of gold in Azinorn, answer, or thou shalt write no more the history of the times to be, but shalt toil with thy hand to make record of the little happenings of the days that were, as do the common men. Then said Saman, All knowledge is with the king. And when the pomp of travelling shall be heard in the streets, and the slow horses whereon the king rideth not go behind lute and drum, then, as the king well knoweth, thou shalt go down to the great white house of kings, and entering the portals where none are worthy to follow, shalt make obeisance alone to all the elder kings of Zarkandhu, whose bones are seated upon golden thrones, grasping their sceptres still. Therein thou shalt go with robes and sceptre through the marble porch, but thou shalt leave behind thee thy gleaming crown that others may wear it, and as the times go by come in to swell the number of the 30 kings that sit in the great white house on golden thrones. There is one doorway in the great white house, and it stands wide with marble portals yawning for kings. But when it shall receive thee, and thine obeisance hath been made because of thine obligation to the 30 kings, thou shalt find at the back of the house an unknown door through which the soul of a king may just pass, and leaving thy bones upon a golden throne, thou shalt go unseen out of the great white house to tread the velvet spaces that lie among the worlds. Then, O king, it were well to travel fast and not to tarry about the houses of men, as do the souls of some who still bewail the sudden murder that sent them upon the journey before their time, and who, being yet both to go, linger in dark chambers all the night. These, setting forth to travel in the dawn, and travelling all the day, see earth behind them gleaming when an evening falls, and again are loth to leave its pleasant haunts, and come back again through dark woods and up into some old loved chamber, and ever tarry between home and flight, and find no rest. Thou wilt set forth at once because the journey is far and lasts for many hours, but the hours on the velvet spaces are the hours of the gods, and we may not say what time such an hour may be if reckoned in mortal years. At last thou shalt come to a grey place filled with mist, with grey shapes standing before it, which are altars, and on the altars rise small red flames from dying fires that scarce illumine the mist. And in the mist it is dark and cold, because the fires are low. These are the altars of the people's faiths, and the flames are the worship of men, and through the mist the gods of old go groping in the dark and in the cold. There thou shalt hear a voice cry feebly, Inyani, Inyani, Lord of the Thunder, where art thou, for I cannot see? And a voice shall answer faintly in the cold, O Maker of many worlds, I am here. And in that place the gods of old are nearly deaf, for the prayers of men grow few. They are nigh blind because the fires burn low upon the altars of men's faiths, and they are very cold. And all about the place of mist there lies a moaning sea, which is called the Sea of Souls, and behind the place of mist are the dim shapes of mountains, and on the peak of one there glows a silvern light that shines in the moaning sea. And ever as the flames on the altars die before the gods of old, the light on the mountain increases, and the light shines over the mist and never through it as the gods of old grow blind. It is said that the light on the mountain shall one day become a new god who is not of the gods of old. There, O king, thou shalt enter the Sea of Souls by the shore where the altars stand which are covered in mist. In that sea are the souls of all that have ever lived on the worlds and all that ever shall live, all freed from earth and flesh. and all the souls in that sea are aware of one another, but more than with hearing or sight, or by taste or touch or smell, and they all speak to each other, yet not with lips, with voices which need no sound. And over the sea lies music as winds o'er an ocean on earth, and there, unfettered by language, great thoughts set outward through the souls as on earth the currents go. Once did I dream that in a mist-built ship I sailed upon that sea, and heard the music that is not of instruments, and voices not from lips, and woke and found that I was upon the earth, and that the gods had lied to me in the night. Into this sea from fields of battle and cities come down the rivers of lives, and ever the gods have taken onyx cups, and far and wide into the worlds again have flung the souls out of the sea, that each soul may find a prison in the body of a man with 5 small windows closely barred, and each one shackled with forgetfulness. But all the while the light on the mountain grows, and none may say what work the god that shall be born of the silvern light shall work on the sea of souls, when the gods of old are dead, and the sea is living still. And answer made the king, Thou that art a prophet of the gods of old, go back and see that those red flames burn more brightly on the altars in the mist, for the gods of old are easy and pleasant gods, and thou canst not say what toil shall vex our souls when the god of the light on the mountain shall stride along the shore where bleach the huge bones of the gods of old. And Samahn answered, All knowledge is with the king. End of Part 1. Part 2. Then the king called to Ynath, bidding him speak concerning the journey of the king. Ynath was the prophet that sat at the eastern gate of the temple of Gorondu. There Ynath prayed his prayers to all the passers-by, lest ever the gods should go abroad, and one should pass him dressed in mortal guise. And men are pleased as they walk by that eastern gate, that Ynath should pray to them for fear that they be gods, so men bring gifts to Ynath in the eastern gate. And Ynath said, All knowledge is with the king. When a strange ship comes to anchor in the air outside thy chamber window, thou shalt leave thy well-kept garden, and it shall become a prey to the nights and days, and be covered again with grass. But going aboard, thou shalt set sail over the sea of time, and well shall the ship steer through the many worlds, and still sail on. If other ships shall pass thee on the way, and hail thee, saying, From what port? Thou shalt answer them, From earth. And if they ask thee, Whither bound? Then thou shalt answer, The end. Or thou shalt hail them, saying, From what port? And they shall answer, From the end, called also the beginning, and bound to earth. And thou shalt sail away, till like an old sorrow, dimly felt by happy men, the world shall gleam in the distance like one star, and as the star pales, thou shalt come to the shore of space, where aeons, rolling shorewards from time's sea, shall lash up centuries to foam away in years. There lies the centre garden of the gods, facing full seawards. All around lie songs that on earth were never sung, fair thoughts not heard among the worlds, dream pictures never seen that drifted over time without a home till at last the aeons swept them onto the shores of space. And in the centre garden of the gods bloom many fancies. Therein once some souls were playing where the gods walked up and down and to and fro, and a dream came in more beauteous than the rest on the crest of a wave of time, and one soul going downward to the shore clutched at the dream and caught it. Then over the dreams and stories and old songs that lay on the shore of space the hours came sweeping back, and the centuries caught that soul and swirled him with his dream far out to the sea of time, and the aeons swept him earthwards and cast him into a palace with all the might of the sea and left him there with his dream. The child grew to a king and still clutched at his dream till the people wondered and laughed. Then, O king, thou didst cast thy dream back into the sea, and time drowned it, and men laughed no more. But thou didst forget that a certain sea beat on a distant shore, and that there was a garden, and therein souls. But at the end of the journey that thou shalt take, when thou comest to the shore of space again, thou shalt go up to the beach, and coming to a garden gate that stands in a garden wall, shalt remember these things again, for it stands where the hours assail not above the beating of time, far up the shore, and nothing altereth there. So thou shalt go through the garden gate, and hear again the whispering of the souls when they talk low, where sing the voices of the gods. There with kindred souls thou shalt speak as thou didst of yore, and tell them what befell thee beyond the tides of time, and how they took thee and made of thee a king so that thy soul found no rest. There in the centre garden thou shalt sit at ease and watch the gods, all rainbow clad, go up and down and to and fro on the paths of dreams and songs, and shalt not venture down to the cheerless sea. For that which a man loves most is not on this side of time, and all which drifts on its aeons is a lure. All knowledge is with the king. Then said the king, Ay, there was a dream once, but time hath swept it away. End of Part 2 of The Journey of the King.
Journey of the King, Parts 3 and 4 from Time and the Gods by Lord Dunsany. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Måns Bro, Helsingfors, Finland. Time and the Gods by Lord Dunsany. Journey of the King, Part 3. Then spake Monith, prophet of the temple of Azur that stands on the snow peak of Ahmoon, and said, All knowledge is with the king. Once thou didst set out upon one day's journey riding thy horse, and before thee had gone a beggar down the road, and his name was Yeb. Him thou didst overtake, and when he heeded not thy coming, thou didst ride over him. Upon the journey that thou shalt one day take, riding upon no horse, this beggar has set out before thee, and is labouring up the crystal steps towards the moon as a man goeth up the steps of a high tower in the dark. On the moon's edge beneath the shadow of Mount Angises, he shall rest awhile, and then shall climb the crystal steps again. Then a great journey lies before he may rest again, till he come to that stair that is called the left eye of Gundo. Then a journey of many crystal steps lieth before him again, with naught to guide him but the light of Omrazu. On the edge of Omrazu shall Yeb tarry long, for the most dreadful part of his journey lieth before him. Up the crystal steps that lie beyond Omrazu he must go, and any that follow, through the howling of all the meteors that ride the sky, for in that part of the crystal space go many meteors up and down, all squealing in the dark, which greatly perplex all travellers. And, if he may see through the gleaming of the meteors, and in spite of their uproar come safely through, he shall come to the star Omrund at the edge of the track of stars, and from star to star along the track of stars the soul of a man may travel with more ease, and there the journey lies no more straight forward, but curves to the right. Then said King Ebalon, Of this beggar whom my horse smote down thou hast spoken much, but I sought to know by what road a king should go when he taketh his last royal journey, and what princes and what people should meet him upon another shore. Then answered Monith, All knowledge is with the king. It hath been doomed by the gods, who speak not in jest, that thou shalt follow the soul that thou didst send alone upon its journey, that soul go not unattended up the crystal steps. Moreover, as this beggar went upon his lonely journey, he dared to curse the king, and his curses lie like red mist along the valleys and hollows wherever he uttered them. By these red mists, O king, thou shalt track him as a man follows a river by night, until thou shalt fare at last to the land wherein he hath blessed thee, repenting of anger at last. And thou shalt see his blessing lie over the land, like a blaze of golden sunshine illumining fields and gardens. Then said the king, The gods have spoken hard above the snowy peaks of this mountain Ahmoon. And Monith said, How a man may come to the shore of space beyond the tides of time I know not, but it is doomed that thou shalt certainly first follow the beggar past the moon, Omrund and Omrazu, till thou comest to the track of stars, and up the track of stars coming toward the right along the edge of it, till thou comest to Ingazi. There the soul of the beggar Yeb sat long, then, breathing deep, set off on his great journey earthward, adown the crystal steps, straight through the spaces where no stars are found to rest at, following the dull gleam of earth and her fields, till he came at last where journeys end and start. Then said King Ebalon, "If this hard tale be true, how shall I find the beggar that I must follow when I come again to the earth?" And the prophet answered, "Thou shalt know him by his name and find him in this place, for that beggar shall be called King Ebalon, and he shall be sitting upon the throne of the kings of Tsarkandhu." And the king answered, "If one sit upon this throne whom men call King Ebalon, who then shall I be?" And the prophet answered, "Thou shalt be a beggar, and thy name shall be Yeb, and thou shalt ever thread the road before the palace waiting for alms from the king whom men call King Ebalon." Then said the king, "Hard gods indeed are those that tramp the snows of Ahmoon about the temple of Azur, for if I sinned against this beggar called Yeb, they too have sinned against him when they doomed him to travel on this weary journey, though he hath not offended." And Monith said, "He too hath offended, for he was angry as thy horse struck him, and the gods smite anger, and his anger and his curses doom him to journey without rest, as also they doom thee." Then said the king, "Thou that sittest upon Ahmoon in the temple of Azur, dreaming thy dreams and making prophecies, foresee the ending of this weary quest and tell me what it shall be." And Monith answered, "As a man looks across great lakes, I have gazed into the days to be, and as the great flies come upon 4 wings of ghost to skim over blue waters, so have my dreams come sailing 2 by 2 out of the days to be. And I dreamed that King Ebalon, whose soul was not thy soul, stood in his palace in a time far hence, and beggars thronged the street outside, and among them was Yeb, a beggar, having thy soul. And it was on the morning of a festival, and the king came robed in white, with all his prophets and his seers and magicians, all down the marble steps to bless the land, and all that stood therein as far as the purple hills, because it was the morning of festival. And as the king raised up his hand over the beggars' heads to bless the fields and rivers and all that stood therein, I dreamed that the quest was ended. All knowledge is with the king. End of Part 3. Part 4 of Journey of the King. Evening darkened, and above the palace domes gleamed out the stars, whereon haply others missed the secret too. And outside the palace in the dark, they that had borne the wine in jewelled cups mocked in low voices at the king and at the wisdom of his prophets. Then spake Ynar, called the prophet of the crystal peak, for there rises Amanath above all that land, a mountain whose peak is crystal. And Ynar beneath its summit hath his temple, and when day shines no longer on the world, Amanath takes the sunlight and gleams afar as a beacon in a bleak land lit at night. And at the hour when all faces are turned on Amanath, Ynar comes forth beneath the crystal peak to weave strange spells and to make signs that people say are surely for the gods. Therefore it is said in all those lands that Ynar speaks at evening to the gods when all the world is still. And Ynar said, "All knowledge is with the king, and without doubt it hath come to the king's ear how certain speech is held at evening on the peak of Amanath. They that speak to me at evening on the peak are they that live in a city through whose streets death walketh not, and I have heard it from their elders that the king shall take no journey, only from thee the hills shall slip away, the dark woods, the sky and all the gleaming worlds that fill the night, and the green fields shall go on untrodden by thy feet, and the blue sky ungazed at by thine eyes, and still the rivers shall all run seaward, but making no music in thine ears. And all the old laments shall still be spoken, troubling thee not, and to the earth shall fall the tears of the children of earth, and never grieving thee. Pestilence, heat and cold, ignorance, famine and anger, these things shall grip their claws upon all men as heretofore, in fields and roads and cities, but shall not hold thee. And from thy soul, sitting in the old worn track of the worlds when all is gone away, shall fall off the shackles of circumstance, and thou shalt dream thy dreams alone. And thou shalt find that dreams are real, where there is naught as far as the rim, but only thy dreams and thee. With them thou shalt build palaces and cities resting upon nothing and having no place in time, not to be assailed by the hours or harmed by ivy or rust, not to be taken by conquerors, but destroyed by thy fancy if thou dost wish it so, or by thy fancy rebuilded. And naught shall ever disturb these dreams of thine, which here are troubled and lost by all the happenings of earth, as the dreams of one who sleeps in a tumultuous city. For these thy dreams shall sweep outward like a strong river over a great waste plain, wherein are neither rocks nor hills to turn it. Only in that place there shall be no boundaries nor sea, neither hindrance nor end. And it were well for thee that thou shouldst take few regrets into thy waste dominions from the world wherein thou livest, for such regrets or any memory of deeds ill done must sit beside thy soul forever in that waste, singing one song always of forlorn remorse, and they too shall be only dreams, but very real. There naught shall hinder thee among thy dreams, for even the gods may harass thee no more when flesh and earth and events with which they bound thee shall have slipped away. Then said the king, I like not this great doom, for dreams are empty. I would see action roaring through the world, and men and deeds. Then answered the prophet, Victory, jewels, and dancing but please thy fancy. What is the sparkle of the gem to thee without thy fancy which it allures? And thy fancy is all a dream. Actions and deeds and men are naught without dreams, and do but fetter them, and only dreams are real. And where thou stayest, when the world shall drift away, there shall be only dreams. And the king answered, A mad prophet. And Ynar said, A mad prophet, but believing that his soul possesseth all things of which his soul may become aware, and that he is master of that soul. And thou, a high-minded king, believing only that thy soul possesseth such few countries as are leaguered by thine armies and the sea, and that thy soul is possessed by certain strange gods of whom thou knowest not, who shall deal with it in a way whereof thou knowest not. Until a knowledge come to us that either is wrong, I have wider realms, I, king, than thee, and hold them beneath no overlords. Then said the king, Thou hast said no overlords. To whom then dost thou speak by strange signs at evening above the world? And Ynar went forward and whispered to the king, and the king shouted, Seize ye this prophet, for he is a hypocrite, and speaks to no gods at evening above the world, but he has deceived us with his signs. And Ynar said, Come not near me, or I shall point toward you when I speak at evening upon the mountains with those that ye know of. Then Ynar went away, and the guards touched him not. End of Journey of the King, Part 4. Recording by Måns Bro, Helsingfors, Finland.
Journey of the King, Parts 5, 6, and 7. From Time and the Gods, by Lord Dunsany. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Robin Cotter, Toronto, Ontario, March 2007. Time and the Gods, by Lord Dunsany. Journey of the King. Part 5. Then spake the prophet Thun, who was clad in seaweed, and had no temple, but lived apart from men. All his life he had lived on a lonely beach, and had heard for ever the wailing of the sea, and the crying of the wind in hollows among the cliffs. Some said that having lived so long by the full beating of the sea, and where always the wind cries loudest, he could not feel the joys of other men, but only felt the sorrow of the sea, crying in his soul for ever. Long ago on the path of stars, midmost between the worlds, there strode the gods of old. In the bleak middle of the worlds they sat, and the worlds went round and round, like dead leaves in the wind at autumn's end, with never a life on one, while the gods went sighing for the things that might not be. And the centuries went over the gods, to go where the centuries go, toward the end of things. And with them went the sighs of all the gods, as they longed for what might not be. One by one, in the midst of the worlds, fell dead the gods of old, still sighing for the things that might not be, all slain by their own regrets. Only Shimono Kani, the youngest of the gods, made him a harp out of the heartstrings of all the elder gods, and, sitting upon the path of stars in the middle of things, played upon the harp a dirge for the gods of old. And the song told of all vain regrets, and of unhappy loves of the gods in the olden time, and of their great deeds that were to adorn the future years. But into the dirge of Shimono Kani came voices crying out of the heartstrings of the gods, all sighing still for the things that might not be. And the dirge and the voices crying go drifting away from the path of stars, away from the midst of things, till they come twittering among the worlds, like a great host of birds that are lost by night. And every note is a life, and many notes become caught up among the worlds to be entangled with flesh for a little while, before they pass again on their journey to the great anthem that roars at the end of time. Shimono Kani hath given a voice to the wind, and added a sorrow to the sea. But when in lighted chambers, after feasting there, arises the voice of the singer to please the king, then is the soul of that singer crying aloud to his fellows, from where he stands chained to earth. And when at the sound of the singing the heart of the king grows sad, and his princes lament, then they remember, though knowing not that, they remember it, the sad face of Shimono Kani, sitting by his dead brethren, the elder gods, playing on the harp of crying heartstrings, whereby he sent their souls among the worlds. And when the music of one lute is lonely on the hills at night, then one soul calleth to his brother souls, the notes of Shimono Kani's dirge, which have not been caught among the worlds, and he knoweth not to whom he calls or why, but knoweth only that minstrelsy is his only cry, and sendeth it out into the dark. But although in the prison houses of earth all memories must die, yet as there sometimes clings to a prisoner's feet some dust of the fields wherein he was captured, so sometimes fragments of remembrance cling to a man's soul after it hath been taken to earth. Then a great minstrel arises, and, weaving together the shreds of his memories, maketh some melody, such as the hand of Shimono Kani smites out of his harp. And they that pass by say, "Hath there not been some such melody before?" And they pass on sad at heart for memories which are not. Therefore, O king, one day the great gates of thy palace shall lie open for a procession wherein the king comes down to pass through a people, lamenting with lute and drum. And on the same day a prison door shall be opened by relenting hands, and one more lost note of Shimono Kani's dirge shall go back to swell his melody again. The dirge of Shimono Kani shall roll on till one day it shall with all its notes complete to overwhelm the silence that sits at the end of things. Then shall Shimono Kani say to his brethren's bones, the things that might not be have at last become. But very quiet shall be the bones of the gods of old, and only their voices shall live which cried from the harp of heartstrings for the things which might not be. Part 6. When the caravans, saying farewell to Zandara, set out across the waste northwards to Inantu, they follow the desert track for 7 days before they come to water where Shuba Onath rises black out of the waste, with a well at its foot and herbage on its summit. On this rock a prophet hath his temple, and is called the Prophet of Journeys, and hath carven in a southern window smiling along the camel track all gods that are benignant to caravans. There a traveller may learn by prophecy whether he shall accomplish the 10 days' journey thence across the desert, and so come to the white city of Inantu, or whether his bones shall lie with the bones of old along the desert track. No name hath the prophet of journeys, for none is needed in that desert where no man calls nor ever a man answers. Thus spake the prophet of journeys, standing before the king. The journey of the king shall be an old journey, pushed on apace. Many a year before the making of the moon, thou camest down with dream camels from the city without a name, that stands beyond all the stars. And then began thy journey over the waste of Nought, and thy dream camel bore thee well when those of certain of thy fellow travellers fell down in the waste, and were covered over by the silence, and were turned again to Nought. And those travellers, whence their dream camels fell, having nothing to carry them further over the waste, were lost beyond, and never found the earth. These are those men that might have been, but were not. And all about thee fluttered the myriad hours, travelling in great swarms across the waste of Nought. How many centuries passed across the cities, while thou wast making thy journey, none may reckon. For there is no time in the waste of Nought, but only the hours fluttering earthwards from beyond to do the work of time. At last the dream-born travellers saw far off a green place gleaming, and made haste toward it, and so came to earth. And there, O king, ye rest for a little while, thou and those that came with thee, making an encampment upon earth before journeying on. There the swarming hours alight, settling on every blade of grass and tree, and spreading over your tents, and devouring all things, and at last bending your very tent poles with their weight, and wearying you. Behind the encampment in the shadow of the tents lurks a dark figure, with a nimble sword, having the name of Time. This is he that hath called the hours from beyond, and he it is that is their master. And it is his work that the hours do, as they devour all green things upon the earth, and tatter the tents, and weary all the travellers. As each of the hours does the work of Time, Time smites him with his nimble sword as soon as his work is done. And the hour falls severed to the dust, with his bright wings scattered, as a locust cut asunder by the scimitar of a skilful swordsman. One by one, O king, with a stir in the camp, and the folding up of the tents one by one, the travellers shall push on again on the journey begun so long before out of the city without a name to the place where dream camels go, striding free through the waste. So into the waste, O king, thou shalt set forth ere long, perhaps to renew friendships begun during thy short encampment upon earth. Other green places thou shalt meet in the waste, and thereon shalt encamp again until driven thence by the hours. What prophet shall relate how many journeys thou shalt make, or how many encampments? But at last thou shalt come to the place of the resting of camels, and there shall gleaming cliffs that are named the ending of journeys lift up out of the waste of Nought, Nought at their feet, Nought laying wide before them, with only the glint of worlds far off to illumine the waste. One by one, on tired dream camels, the travellers shall come in, and going up the pathway through the cliff in that land of the resting of camels, shall come on the city of ceasing. There the dream-wrought pinnacles and the spires that are builded of men's hopes shall rise up real before thee, seen only hitherto as a mirage in the waste. So far the swarming hours may not come, and far away among the tents shall stand the dark figure with the nimble sword. But in the scintillant streets, under the song-built abodes of the last of cities, thy journey, O king, shall end. Part 7. In the valley beyond Sidono there lies a garden of poppies, and where the poppies' heads are all a-swing with summer breezes that go up the valley, there lies a path well strewn with ocean shells. Over Sidono's summit the birds come streaming to the lake that lies in the valley of the garden, and behind them rises the sun, sending Sidono's shadow as far as the edge of the lake. And down the path of many ocean shells, when they begin to gleam in the sun, every morning walks an aged man, clad in a silken robe with strange devices woven. A little temple where the old man lives stands at the edge of the path. None worship there, for Zornadhu, the old prophet, hath forsaken men to walk among his poppies. For Zornadhu hath failed to understand the purport of kings and cities, and the moving up and down of many people, to the tune of the clinking of gold. Therefore hath Zornadhu gone far away from the sound of cities, and from those that are ensnared thereby, and beyond Sidono's mountain hath come to rest where there are neither kings, nor armies, nor bartering for gold, but only the heads of the poppies that sway in the wind together, and the birds that fly from Sidono to the lake, and then the sunrise over Sidono's summit, and afterwards the flight of birds out of the lake and over Sidono again, and sunset behind the valley, and high over lake and garden, the stars that know not cities. There Zornadhu lives in his garden of poppies, with Sidono standing between him, and the whole world of men. And when the wind, blowing athwart the valley, sways the heads of the tall poppies against the temple wall, the old prophet says, "The flowers are all praying, and lo, they be nearer to the gods than men." But the heralds of the king, coming after many days of travel to Sidono, perceived the garden valley. By the lake they saw the poppy garden gleaming round and small, like a sunrise over water on a misty morning, seen by some shepherd from the hills. And, descending the bare mountain for 3 days, they came to the gaunt pines, and ever between the tall trunks came the glare of the poppies that shone from the garden valley. For a whole day they travelled through the pines. That night a cold wind came up the garden valley, crying against the poppies. Low in his temple, with a song of exceeding grief, Zornadhu in the morning made a dirge for the passing of poppies, because in the night time there had fallen petals that might not return or ever come again into the garden valley. Outside the temple, on the path of ocean shells, the heralds halted, and read the names and honours of the king, and from the temple came the voice of Zornadhu, still singing his lament. But they took him from his garden because of the king's command, and down his gleaming path of ocean shells, and away up Sidono, and left the temple empty, with none to lament when silken poppies died. And the will of the wind of the autumn was wrought upon the poppies, and the heads of the poppies that rose from the earth went down to the earth again, as the plume of a warrior smitten in a heathen fight far away, where there are none to lament him. Thus out of his land of flowers went Zornadhu, and came perforce into the lands of men, and saw cities, and in the cities' midst stood up before the king. And the king said, "Zornadhu, what of the journey of the king, and of the princes, and the people that shall meet me?" Zornadhu answered, "I know naught of kings, but in the night time the poppy made his journey a little before dawn. Thereafter the wildfowl came as is their wont over Sidono's summit, and the sun rising behind them gleamed upon Sidono, and all the flowers of the lake awoke. And the bee passing up and down the garden went droning to other poppies, and the flowers of the lake, they that had known the poppy, knew him no more. And the sun's rays slanting from Sidono's crest lit still a garden valley, where one poppy waved his petals to the dawn no more. And I, O king, that down a path of gleaming ocean shells walk in the morning, found not, nor have since found, that poppy again, that hath gone on the journey, whence there is not returning out of my garden valley. And I, O king, made a dirge to cry beyond that valley, and the poppies bowed their heads. But there is no cry nor no lament that may adjure the life to return again to a flower that grew in a garden once, and hereafter is not. Unto what place the lives of poppies have gone, no man shall truly say. Sure it is that to that place are only outward tracks. Only it may be that when a man dreams at evening in a garden where heavily the scent of poppies hangs in the air, when the winds have sunk, and far away the sound of a lute is heard on lonely hills, as he dreams of silken scarlet poppies that once were a swing together in the gardens of his youth, the lives of those old lost poppies shall return, living again in his dream, so there may dream the gods. And through the dreams of some divinity reclining in tinted fields above the morning we may haply pass again, although our bodies have long swirled up and down the world with other dust. In these strange dreams our lives may be again, all in the centre of our hopes, rejoicings, and laments, until above the morning the gods wake to go about their work, haply to remember still their idle dreams, haply to dream them all again in the stillness when shines the starlight of the gods. End of The Journey of the King, Parts 5, 6, and 7. Journey of the King, Parts 8 and 9, from Time and the Gods, by Lord Dunsany. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Robin Cotter, March 2007. Time and the Gods, by Lord Dunsany. Journey of the King, Parts 8 and 9. Part 8. Then said the King, I like not these strange journeys, nor this faint wandering through the dreams of gods, like the shadow of a weary camel that may not rest when the sun is low. The gods that have made me to love the earth's cool words and dancing streams do ill to send me into the starry spaces that I love not, with my soul still peering earthward through the eternal years, as a beggar who once was noble, staring from the street at lighted halls. For wherever the gods may send me, I shall be as the gods have made me, a creature loving the green fields of earth. Now if there stand one prophet here that hath the ear of those two splendid gods that stride above the glories of the orient sky, tell them that there is on earth one king in the land called Zarkandhu, to the south of the Opal Mountains, who would fain tarry among the many gardens of earth, and would leave to other men the splendors that the gods shall give the dead above the twilight that surrounds the stars. Then spake Yamen, prophet of the temple of Oben that stands on the shores of a great lake, facing east. Yamen said, I pray oft to the gods who sit above the twilight behind the east. When the clouds are heavy and red at sunset, or when there is boding of thunder or eclipse, then I pray not, lest my prayers be scattered and beaten earthward. But when the sun sets in a tranquil sky, pale green or azure, the light of his farewells stays long upon lonely hills, then I send forth my prayers to flutter upward to gods that are surely smiling, and the gods hear my prayers. But, O King, boons sought out of due time from the gods are never wholly to be desired, and, if they should grant to thee to tarry on the earth, old age would trouble thee with burdens more and more, till thou wouldst become the driven slave of the hours in fetters that none may break. The King said, that they have devised this burden of age may surely stay it. Pray therefore on the calmest evening of the year to the gods above the twilight, that I may tarry always on the earth, and always young, while over my head the scourges of the gods pass and alight not. Then answered Yamen, the King hath commanded, yet among the blessings of the gods there always cries a curse. The great princes that make merry with the King, who tell of the great deeds that the King wrought in the former time, shall one by one grow old. And thou, O King, seated at the feast crying, make merry and extolling the former time, shall find about thee white heads nodding in sleep, and men that are forgetting the former time. Then one by one the names of those that sported with thee once called by the gods, one by one the names of the singers that sing the songs thou lovest called by the gods. Lastly, of those that chased the grey boar by night and took him in Orgum river, only the king. Then a new people, that have not known the old deeds of the king, nor fought and chased with him, who dare not make merry with the king, as did his long-dead princes. And all the while those princes that are dead, growing dearer and greater in thy memory, and while the men that served thee then, growing more small to thee, and all the old things fading, and new things arising, which are not as the old things were, the world changing yearly before thine eyes, and the gardens of thy childhood overgrown. Because thy childhood was in olden years, thou shalt love the olden years, but ever the new years shall overthrow them and their customs, and not the will of a king may stay the changes that the gods have planned for all the customs of old. Ever thou shalt say, this was not so, and ever the new custom shall prevail even against a king. When thou hast made merry 1,000 times, thou shalt grow tired of making merry. At last thou shalt become weary of the chase, and still old age shall not come near to thee to stifle desires that have been too oft fulfilled. Then, O king, thou shalt be a hunter yearning for the chase, but with naught to pursue that hath not been oft overcome. Old age shall come not to bury thine ambitions in a time where there is naught for thee to aspire to any more. Experience of many centuries shall make thee wise, but hard and very sad. And thou shalt be a mind apart from thy fellows, and curse them all for fools, and they shall not perceive thy wisdom, because thy thoughts are not their thoughts, and the gods that they have made are not the gods of the olden time. No solace shall thy wisdom bring thee, but only an increasing knowledge that thou knowest not, and thou shalt feel as a wise man in a world of fools, or else as a fool in a world of wise men, when all men feel so sure, and ever thy doubts increase. When all that spake with thee of thine old deeds are dead, those that saw them not shall speak of them again to thee, till one speaking to thee of thy deeds of valour add more than even a man should when speaking to a king, and thou shalt suddenly doubt whether these great deeds were, and there shall be none to tell thee, only the echoes of the voices of the gods still singing in thine ears, when long ago they called the princes that were thy friends. And thou shalt hear the knowledge of the olden time most wrongly told and afterwards forgotten. Then many prophets shall arise, claiming discovery of that old knowledge. Then thou shalt find that seeking knowledge is vain, as the chase is vain, as making merry is vain, as all things are vain. One day thou shalt find that it is vain to be a king. Greatly then will the acclamations of the people weary thee, till the time when people grow aweary of kings. Then thou shalt know that thou hast been uprooted from thine olden time, and set to live in uncongenial years, and jests all new to royal ears shall smite thee on the head like hailstones, when thou hast lost thy crown, when those to whose grandsires thou hadst granted to bring them as children to kiss the feet of the king shall mock at thee, because thou hast not learnt to barter with gold. Not all the marvels of the future time shall atone to thee for those old memories that glow warmer and brighter every year as they recede into the ages that the gods have gathered. And always dreaming of thy long-dead princes, and of the great kings of other kingdoms in the olden time, thou shalt fail to see the grandeur to which a hurrying, jesting people shall attain in that kingless age. Lastly, O king, thou shalt perceive men changing in a way that thou shalt not comprehend, knowing what thou canst not know, till thou shalt discover that these are men no more, and a new race holds dominion over the earth, whose forefathers were men. These shall speak to thee no more, as they hurry upon a quest that thou shalt never understand, and thou shalt know that thou canst no longer take thy part in shaping destinies, but in a world of cities only pine for air and the waving grass again, and the sound of a wind in trees. Then even this shall end, with the shapes of the gods in the darkness gathering all lives but thine, when the hills shall fling up earth's long-stored heat back to the heavens again, when earth shall be old and cold, with nothing alive upon it but one king. Then said the king, "Pray to those hard gods still, for those that have loved the earth with all its gardens and woods and singing streams will love earth still when it is old and cold, and with all its gardens gone, and all the purport of its being failed, and naught but memories." Part 9. Then spake Paharn, a prophet of the land of Hurn. And Paharn said, "There was one man that knew, but he stands not here." And the king said, "Is he further than my heralds might travel in the night, if they went upon fleet horses?" And the prophet answered, "He is no further than thy heralds may well travel in the night, but further than they may return from in all the years. Out of this city there goes a valley wandering through all the world, and opens out at last on the green land of Hurn. On the one side in the distance gleams the sea, and on the other side a forest, black and ancient, darkens the fields of Hurn. Beyond the forest and the sea there is no more, saving the twilight, and beyond that the gods. In the mouth of the valley sleeps the village of Rhiston. Here I was born, and heard the murmur of the flocks and herds, and saw the tall smoke standing between the sky and the still roofs of Rhiston, and learned that men might not go into the dark forest, and that beyond the forest and the sea was naught saving the twilight, and beyond that the gods. Often there came travellers from the world all down the winding valley, and spake with strange speech in Rhiston, and returned again up the valley, going back to the world. Sometimes with bells and camels, and men running on foot, kings came down the valley from the world, but always the travellers returned by the valley again, and none went further than the land of Hurn. And Kithneb also was born in the land of Hurn, and tended the flocks with me. But Kithneb would not care to listen to the murmur of the flocks and herds, and see the tall smoke standing between the roofs and the sky, but needed to know how far from Hurn it was that the world met the twilight, and how far across the twilight sat the gods. And often Kithneb dreamed as he tended the flocks and herds, and when others slept he would wander near to the edge of the forest, wherein men might not go. And the elders of the land of Hurn reproved Kithneb when he dreamed. Yet Kithneb was still as other men, and mingled with his fellows until the day of which I will tell thee, O king. For Kithneb was aged about a score of years, and he and I were sitting near the flocks, and he gazed long at the point where the dark forest met the sea at the end of the land of Hurn. But when night drove the twilight down under the forest, we brought the flocks together to Rhiston, and I went up the street between the houses to see 4 princes that had come down the valley from the world, and they were clad in blue and scarlet, and wore plumes upon their heads, and they gave us in exchange for our sheep some gleaming stones, which they told us were of great value on the word of princes. And I sold them 3 sheep, and Darniag sold them 8. But Kithneb came not with the others to the marketplace where the 4 princes stood, but went alone across the fields to the edge of the forest. And it was upon the next morning that the strange thing befell Kithneb, for I saw him in the morning coming from the fields, and I hailed him with the shepherd's cry, wherewith we shepherds call to one another, and he answered not. Then I stopped and spake to him, and Kithneb said not a word till I became angry and left him. Then we spake together concerning Kithneb, and others had hailed him, and he had not answered them, but to one he had said that he had heard the voices of the gods speaking beyond the forest, and so would never listen more to the voices of men. Then we said, Kithneb is mad, and none hindered him. Another took his place among the flocks, and Kithneb sat in the evenings by the edge of the forest on the plain alone. So Kithneb spake to none for many days, but when any forced him to speak, he said that every evening he heard the gods when they came to sit in the forest from over the twilight and sea, and that he would speak no more with men. But as the months went by, men in Rhiston came to look on Kithneb as a prophet, and we were wont to point to him when strangers came down the valley from the world, saying, "Here in the land of Hurn we have a prophet such as you have not among your cities, for he speaks at evening with the gods. A year had passed over the silence of Kithneb when he came to me and spake. And I bowed before him, because we believed that he spake among the gods. And Kithneb said, I will speak to thee before the end, because I am most lonely. For how may I speak again with men and women in the little streets of Rhiston among the houses, when I have heard the voices of the gods singing above the twilight? But I am more lonely than ever Rhiston wants of. For this I tell thee, when I hear the gods, I know not what they say. Well indeed I know the voice of each, for ever calling me away from contentment. Well I know their voices as they call to my soul and trouble it. I know by their tone when they rejoice, and I know when they are sad, for even the gods feel sadness. I know when over fallen cities of the past, and the curved white bones of heroes they sing the dirges of the gods' lament. But alas, their words I know not, and the wonderful strains of the melody of their speech beat on my soul, and pass away unknown. Therefore I travelled from the land of Hurn till I came to the house of the prophet Arnunyo, and told him that I sought to find the meaning of the gods. And Arnunyo told me to ask the shepherds concerning all the gods, for what the shepherds knew it was meet for a man to know, and beyond that, knowledge turned into trouble. But I told Arnunyo that I had heard myself the voices of the gods, and knew that they were there beyond the twilight, and so could never more bow down to the gods that the shepherds made from the red clay which they scooped with their hands out of the hillside. Then said Arnunyo to me, Natheless forget that thou hast heard the gods, and bow down again to the gods of the red clay that the shepherds make, and find thereby the ease that the shepherds find, and at last die, remembering devoutly the gods of the red clay that the shepherds scooped with their hands out of the hill. For the gifts of the gods that sit beyond the twilight and smile at the gods of clay are neither ease nor contentment. And I said, The god that my mother made out of the red clay that she had got from the hill, fashioning it with many arms and eyes, as she sang me songs of its power, and told me stories of its mystic birth, this god is lost and broken, and ever in my ears is ringing the melody of the gods. And Arnunyo said, If thou wouldst still seek knowledge, know that only those that come behind the gods may clearly know their meaning. And this thou canst only do by taking ship and putting out to sea from the land of Hurn, and sailing up the coast towards the forest. There the sea cliffs turn to the left or southward, and full upon them beats the twilight from over the sea, and there thou mayst come round behind the forest. Here where the world's edge mingles with the twilight, the gods come in their evening, and if thou canst come behind them, thou shalt hear their voices clear, beating full seaward, and filling all the twilight with sound of song, and thou shalt know the meaning of the gods. But where the cliffs turn southward, there sits behind the gods of Brimdono, the oldest whirlpool in the sea, roaring to guard his masters. Him the gods have chained for ever to the floor of the twilit sea to guard the door of the forest that lieth above the cliffs. Here then, if thou canst hear the voices of the gods, as thou hast said, thou wilt know their meaning clear, but this will profit thee little when Brimdono drags thee down, and all thy ship. Thus spake Kithneb to me, but I said, O Kithneb, forget those whirlpool-guarded gods beyond the forest, and if thy small god be lost, thou shalt worship with me the small god that my mother made. Thousands of years ago he conquered cities, but is not any longer an angry god. Pray to him, Kithneb, and he shall bring thee comfort and increase to thy flocks and a mild spring, and at the last a quiet ending for thy days. But Kithneb heeded not, and only bade me find a fisher ship and men to row it. So on the next day we put forth from the land of Hurn in a boat that the fisher folk use, and with us came 4 of the fisher folk who rowed the boat while I held the rudder, but Kithneb sat and spake not in the prow. And we rowed westward up the coast till we came at evening where the clouds turned southward, and the twilight gleamed upon them and the sea. There we turned southwards and saw at once Brimdono. And as a man tears the purple cloak of a king slain in battle to divide it with other warriors, Brimdono tore the sea. And ever around and around him, with a gnarled hand, Brimdono whirled the sail of some adventurous ship, the trophy of some calamity wrought in his greed for shipwreck long ago, where he sat to guard his masters from all who fare on the sea. And ever one far-reaching empty hand swung up and down, so that we durst go no nearer. Only Kithneb neither saw Brimdono nor heard his roar, and when we would go no further, bade us lower a small boat with oars out of the ship. Into this boat Kithneb descended, not heeding words from us, and onward rowed alone. A cry of triumph over ships and men Brimdono uttered before him, but Kithneb's eyes were turned toward the forest as he came behind the gods. Upon his face the twilight beat full from the haunts of evening to illumine the smiles that grew about his eyes as he came behind the gods. Him that had found the gods above their twilit cliffs, him that had heard their voices close at last and knew their meaning clear, him from their cheerless world with its doubtings and prophets that lie from all hidden meanings, where truth rang clear at last, Brimdono took. But when Paharn ceased to speak, in the king's ears the roar of Brimdono, exulting over ancient triumphs and the whelming of ships, seemed still to ring. End of Journey of the King, Parts 8 and 9.
Parts 10 and 11 from Time and the Gods by Lord Dunsany. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Time and the Gods by Lord Dunsany. Journey of the King, Part 10. Then Mohantis spake, the hermit prophet, who lived in the deep untravelled woods that seclude Lake Alana. I dreamed that to the west of all the seas I saw by vision the mouth of Munra-o, guarded by golden gates, and through the bars of the gates that guard the mysterious river of Munra-o I saw the flashes of golden barks, wherein the gods went up and down and to and fro through the evening dusk. And I saw that Munra-o was a river of dreams such as came through remembered gardens in the night, to charm our infancy as we slept beneath the sloping gables of the houses of long ago. And Munra-o rolled down her dreams from the unknown inner land and slid them under the golden gates, and out into the waste, unheeding sea, till they beat far off upon low-lying shores and murmured songs of long ago to the islands of the south, or shouted tumultuous paeans to the northern crags, or cried forlornly against rocks where no one came, dreams that might not be dreamed. Many gods there be, that through the dusk of an evening in the summer go up and down this river. There I saw, in a high bark all of gold, gods of the pomp of cities. There I saw gods of splendor, in boats bejeweled to the keels, gods of magnificence and gods of power. I saw the dark ships and the glint of steel of the gods whose trade was war. And I heard the melody of the bells of silver arrow in the rigging of harpstrings as the gods of melody went sailing through the dusk on the river of Munra-o. Wonderful river of Munra-o! I saw a grey ship with sails of the spider's web, all lit with dewdrop lanterns, and on its prow was a scarlet cock with its wings spread far and wide, when the gods of the dawn sailed also on Munra-o. Down this river it is the wont of the gods to carry the souls of men eastward to where the world in the distance faces on Munra-o. Then I knew that when the gods of the pride of power and gods of the pomp of cities went down the river in their tall gold ships to take earthward other souls, swiftly adown the river and between the ships had gone in this boat of birch bark the god Tarn, the hunter, bearing my soul to the world. And I know now that he came down the stream in the dusk, keeping well to the middle, and that he moved silently and swiftly among the ships, wielding a twin-bladed oar. I remember now the yellow gleaming of the great boats of the gods of the pomp of cities, and the huge prow above me of the gods of the pride of power, when Tarn, dipping his right blade into the river, lifted his left blade high, and the drops gleamed and fell. Thus Tarn the hunter took me to the world that faces across the sea of the west, on the gate of Munro. And so it was that there grew upon me the glamour of the hunt, though I had forgotten Tarn, and took me into mossy places and into dark woods, and I became the cousin of the wolf, and looked into the lynx's eyes, and knew the bear, and the birds called to me with half-remembered notes, and there grew in me a deep love of great rivers and of all western seas, and a distrust of cities, and all the while I had forgotten Tarn. I know not what high galleon shall come for thee, O king, nor what rowers, clad with purple, shall row at the bidding of gods, when thou goest back with pomp to the river of Munro. But for me Tarn waits where the seas of the west break over the edge of the world, and, as the years pass over me, and the love of the chase sinks low, and as the glamour of the dark woods and mossy places dies down in my soul, ever louder and louder lap the ripples against the canoe of birch bark where, holding his twin-bladed oar, Tarn waits. But when my soul hath no more knowledge of the woods, nor kindred any longer with the creatures of the dark, and when all that Tarn hath given it shall be lost, then Tarn shall take me back over the western seas, where all the remembered years lie floating idly a-swing with the ebb and flow, to bring me again to the river of Munro. Far up that river we shall haply chase those creatures whose eyes are peering in the night as they prowl around the world, for Tarn was ever a hunter. Part 11. Then Ulf spake, the prophet who in Sistramedes lives in a temple anciently dedicated to the gods. Rumour hath guessed that there the gods walked once some time towards evening. But Time, whose hand is against the temples of the gods, hath dealt harshly with it, and overturned its pillars, and set upon its ruins his sign and seal. Now Ulf dwells there alone. And Ulf said, There sets, O king, a river outward from earth which meets with a mighty sea, whose waters roll through space and fling their billows on the shores of every star. These are the river and the sea of the tears of men. And the king said, Men have not written of this sea. And the prophet answered, Have not tears enough burst in the night time out of sleeping cities? Have not the sorrows of 10,000 homes sent streams into this river when twilight fell, and it was still, and there was none to hear? Have there not been hopes, and were they all fulfilled? Have there not been conquests and bitter defeats? And have not flowers, when spring was over, died in the gardens of many children? Tears enough, O king, tears enough have gone down out of earth to make such a sea, and deep it is and wide, and the gods know it, and it flings its spray on the shores of all the stars. Down this river, and across this sea, thou shalt fare in a ship of sighs, and all around thee, over the sea shall fly the prayers of men which rise on white wings higher than their sorrows. Sometimes perched in the rigging, sometimes crying around thee, shall go the prayers that avail not to stay thee in Zarkandhu. Far over the waters, and on the wings of the prayers, beats the light of an inaccessible star. No hand hath touched it, none hath journeyed to it. It hath no substance. It is only a light. It is the star of hope, and it shines far over the sea, and brightens the world. It is not but a light, but the gods gave it. Led only by the light of this star, the myriad prayers that thou shalt see all around thee fly to the hall of the gods. Sighs shall waft thy ship of sighs over the sea of tears. Thou shalt pass by islands of laughter and lands of song lying low in the sea, and all of them drenched with tears, flung over their rocks by the waves of the sea, all driven by the sighs. But at last thou shalt come with the prayers of men, to the great hall of the gods, where the chairs of the gods are carved of onyx, grouped round the golden throne of the eldest of the gods. And there, O king, hope not to find the gods, but reclining upon the golden throne, wearing a cloak of his master's, thou shalt see the figure of Time, with blood upon his hands, and loosely dangling from his fingers a dripping sword, and spattered with blood, but empty shall stand the onyx chairs. There he sits on his master's throne, dangling idly his sword, or with it flicking cruelly at the prayers of men that lie in a great heap bleeding at his feet. For a while, O king, the gods had sought to solve the riddles of time. For a while they made him their slave, and time smiled and obeyed his masters. For a while, O king, for a while. He that hath spared nothing hath not spared the gods, nor yet shall he spare thee. Then the king spake dolefully in the hall of kings, and said, May I not find at last the gods, and must it be that I may not look in their faces at the last, to see whether they be kindly? They that have sent me on my earthward journey, I would greet on my returning, if not as a king coming again to his own city, yet as one who having been ordered had obeyed, and obeying had merited something of those for whom he toiled. I would look them in their faces, O prophet, and ask them concerning many things, and would know the wherefore of much. I had hoped, O prophet, that those gods that had smiled upon my childhood, whose voices stirred at evening in gardens when I was young, would hold dominion still, when at last I came to seek them. O prophet, if this is not to be, make you a great dirge for my childhood's gods, and fashion silver bells, and, setting them mostly a-swing amidst such trees as grew in the garden of my childhood, sing you this dirge in the dusk, and sing it when the low moth flies up and down and the bat first comes peering from her home. Sing it when white mists come rising from the river, when smoke is pale and grey, while flowers are yet closing, ere voices are yet hushed. Sing it while all things yet lament the day, or ever the great lights of heaven come blazing forth, and night with her splendors takes the place of day. For if the old gods die, let us lament them, or ever new knowledge comes, while all the world still shudders at their loss. For at the last, O prophet, what is left? Only the gods of my childhood dead, only time striding large and lonely through the spaces, chilling the moon and paling the light of stars, and scattering earthward out of both his hands the dust of forgetfulness over the fields of heroes and smitten temples of the older gods. But when the other prophets heard with what doleful words the king spake in the hall, they all cried out, It is not as Ulf has said, but as I have said, and I. Then the king pondered long, not speaking. But down in the city, in a street between the houses, stood grouped together they that were wont to dance before the king, and they that had borne his wine in jewelled cups. Long they had tarried in the city, hoping that the king might relent, and once again regard them with kindly faces, calling for wine and song. The next morning they were all to set out in search of some new kingdom, and they were peering between the houses and up the long grey street to see for the last time the palace of King Eberlon. And pattering leaves the dancer cried, Not any more, not any more at all shall we drift up the carven hall to dance before the king. He that now watches the magic of his prophets will behold no more the wonder of the dance, and among ancient parchments, strange and wise, he shall forget the swirl of drapery, when we swing together through the dance of the myriad steps. And with her were silvern fountain, and summer lightning, and dream of the sea, each lamenting that they should dance no more to please the eyes of the king. And in Ton, who had carried at the banquet for 50 years the goblet of the king, set with its 4 sapphires, each as large as an eye, said as he spread his hands towards the palace, making the sign of farewell, Not all the magic of prophecy, nor yet foreseeing nor perceiving, may equal the power of wine. Through the small door in the king's hall, one goes by 100 steps, and many sloping corridors, into the cool of the earth, where lies a cavern vaster than the hall. Therein, curtained by the spider, repose the casks of wine that are wont to gladden the hearts of the kings of Zarkandhu. In islands far to the eastward, the vine, from whose heart this wine was long since wrung, hath climbed aloft with many a clutching finger, and beheld the sea, and ships of the olden time, and men since dead, and gone down into the earth again, and been covered over with weeds. And green with the damp of years, there lie 3 casks that a city gave not up until all her defenders were slain, and her houses fired. And ever to the soul of that wine is added a more ardent fire, as ever the years go by. Thither it is my pride to go before a banquet in the olden years, and coming up to bear in the sapphire goblet the fire of the elder kings, and to watch the king's eye flash, and his face grow nobler and more like his sire's as he drank the gleaming wine. And now the king seeks wisdom from his prophets, while all the glory of the past and all the clattering splendor of today grows old, far down, forgotten beneath his feet. And when he ceased, the cupbearers and the women that danced looked long in silence at the palace. Then one by one all made the farewell sign before they turned to go, and as they did this, a herald unseen in the dark was speeding towards them. After a long silence the king spake. "Prophets of my kingdom," he said, "you have not prophesied alike, and the words of each prophet condemns his fellow's words, so that the wisdom may not be discovered among prophets. But I command that none in my kingdom shall doubt that the earliest king of Zarkandhu stored wine beneath this palace before the building of the city, or ever the palace arose, and I shall cause commands to be uttered for the making of a banquet at once within this hall, so that ye shall perceive that the power of my wine is greater than all your spells, and dancing more wondrous than prophecy." The dancers and the wine-bearers were summoned back, and as the night wore on a banquet was spread, and all the prophets bidden to be seated. Saman, Yanath, Monith, Yanarthun, the prophet of journeys, Zornadhu, Yamin, Paharn, Ilana, Ulf, and one that had not spoken, nor yet revealed his name, and who wore his prophet's cloak across his face. And the prophets feasted as they were commanded, and spake as other men spake, save he whose face was hidden, who neither ate nor spake. Once he put out his hand from under his cloak, and touched a blossom among the flowers upon the table, and the blossom fell. And pattering leaves came in and danced again, and the king smiled. And pattering leaves was happy, though she had not the wisdom of the prophets. And in and out, in and out, in and out among the columns of the hall went summer lightning in the maze of the dance, and Silver Fountain bowed before the king, and danced, and danced, and bowed again. And old Intan went to and fro from the cavern to the king, gravely through the midst of the dancers, but with kindly eyes. And when the king had often drunk of the old wine of the elder kings, he called for Dream of the Sea, and bade her sing. And Dream of the Sea came through the arches, and sang of an island builded by magic out of pearls, that lay set in a ruby sea, and how it lay far off and under the south, guarded by jagged reefs whereon the sorrows of the world were wrecked and never came to the island, and how a low sunset always reddened the sea and lit the magic isle and never turned to night, and how someone sang always and endlessly to lure the soul of a king who might by enchantment pass the guarding reefs to find rest on the Pearl Island and not be troubled more, but only see sorrows on the outer reef battered and broken. Then Soul of the South rose up and sang a song of a fountain that ever sought to reach the sky, and was ever doomed to fall to the earth again until at last. Then, whether it was the art of pattering leaves, or the song of Dream of the Sea, or whether it was the fire of the wine of the elder kings, Eberlon bade farewell kindly to the prophets when morning paled the stars. Then, along the torchlit corridors the king went to his chamber, and having shut the door in the empty room, beheld suddenly a figure wearing the cloak of a prophet, and the king perceived that it was he whose face was hidden at the banquet, who had not revealed his name. And the king said, "Art thou too a prophet?" And the figure answered, "I am a prophet." And the king said, Knowest thou aught concerning the journey of the king? And the figure answered, I know, but have never said. And the king said, Who art thou that knowest so much, and hast not told it? And he answered, I am the End. Then the cloaked figure strode away from the palace, and the king, unseen by the guards, followed upon his journey. The End. End of Journey of the King, Parts 10 and 11. End of Time and the Gods by Lord Dunsany.